Half-Wolf Queen Part 1. The outcast shadow. The kingdom of Viora was a tapestry woven from howls and whispers. A land where power was measured in the strength of your wolf, and status in the purity of your bloodline. Under skies of perpetual twilight, the mighty Alpha King, Kalin, ruled from a palace of stone and shadow. And on the outskirts, in the quiet places where the light barely reached, lived those the kingdom had forgotten. Like Lyra, another day, another haul. Come on, just a few more routes and we can head back. Her voice was a soft murmur in the vastness of the woods. This was her world, the scent of damp earth and pine, the feel of rough bark under her fingers. It was a simple life, a safe life. It was a life of hiding. Who's there? Her heart, as always, leapt into her throat. Was it a royal patrol? A hunter who might question a lone girl in the woods? But it was only a fox, darting into the undergrowth. She let out a shaky breath, her shoulders slumping. This was the constant rhythm of her life, a melody of fear and relief. She was a half-wolf. Her father, a human, was a ghost of a memory. Her mother, a wolf, was gone. And she was a secret. The thunder of galloping hooves shattered the forest's peace. A rider? Here? She melted back against a large oak tree, her simple brown cloak blending into the bark. She held her breath, making herself small, invisible. The rider, a royal messenger in the king's colors, did not even glance her way. He was a blur of purpose and speed, heading towards the one place she never went, the village. A cold dread trickled down her spine. Royal messengers never brought good news to the outskirts. Had they finally come for someone like her? She had to know. Abandoning her basket, she moved through the trees, a silent shadow, following the rider's path. The village center was already abuzz. The messenger stood on the well's stone ledge, a scroll held high. Lyra stayed hidden at the edge of the tree line, her pulse a frantic drum in her ears. Hear ye, people of Viora. By decree of Alpha King Kalin. The annual mating ceremony will be held in 3 days' time at the royal palace. All pure-blooded wolves of age are commanded to attend. A wave of excitement swept through the crowd. The mating ceremony, the sacred event where fated bonds were recognized, where futures were forged. It was the dream of every young wolf in the kingdom. Every pure-blooded wolf. Lyra's heart twisted. She turned to slip away, back into the safety of her forest. But then the messenger's voice rose again, and he called out a specific name. A name that froze her in her tracks. And by special invitation, the human girl, Alara, is to attend as a guest of her friend, the pure blood eye. SLA. A special invitation. For a human, the crowd murmured, surprised but not outraged. A human was simply other. But a half-wolf? A half-wolf was a stain, an abomination. Lyra felt the old, familiar shame burn her cheeks. Alara could go because her blood was openly human. But Lyra's blood was a lie she had to protect at all costs. Later that evening, a soft knock came on the door of her small, isolated cottage. She knew who it was before she opened it. Isla stood there, her face beaming, her energy a bright, warm force. Lyra, you heard? I'm going to the mating ceremony. And you have to come with me. Lyra took a step back, shaking her head. Isla, no. You know I can't. It's impossible. Nothing is impossible. I won't go without you. We've been friends since we were pups. You're the only one who truly knows me. Please, Lyra, I need you there. Isla's eyes were pleading. She was the only one in the world who knew Lyra's secret, the only one who had never judged her for it. The palace, the Alpha King, the pure bloods, they'll smell it on me, Isla. They'll know. Nobody will be paying attention to you, Isla insisted, grabbing her hands. They'll all be too focused on finding their own mates. You can stay in the background. Please, just for one night. For me. Lyra looked into her friend's hopeful face. The fear in her heart was a cold, hard stone. But the love for her friend, that was a flickering, warm flame. To go to the palace was to walk into the lion's den. It was madness. It was suicide. But to let her only friend face that den alone. She took a deep, shuddering breath, her fate sealing itself with her whisper. Okay, I'll go. 3 days later, Lyra stood at the edge of the grand palace courtyard, and she knew, with every fiber of her being, that she had made a terrible mistake. The air was thick with the scent of 100 different wolves, powerful, confident, pure. Their laughter was too loud, their silks too bright, their gazes too sharp. She clutched the simple, borrowed blue gown she wore, feeling the coarse fabric like a brand of her otherness. She tried to make herself small, to become part of the marble pillar she stood beside. She just had to get through the night. Stay in the shadows. Breathe. And then she saw them. Her stepmother, Lady Morgan, and her 2 pure-blood daughters. They moved through the crowd like queens, their noses held high, their eyes scanning for any imperfection. And their eyes found her. A slow, cruel smile spread across Lady Morgan's face. She glided over, her daughters smirking behind her. Well, what is this stray doing so far from its forest? Lyra lowered her gaze, her cheeks burning. I was invited, stepmother. Invited? Morgan's laugh was like shattering glass. You a guest in the same way a weed is a guest in a rose garden. You do not belong here. You spoil the beauty. You know your place. It is not here. The words were a public lashing. Wolves nearby turned to watch, their expressions a mixture of pity and amusement. Lyra's vision blurred with unshed tears. She wanted to run, to disappear. Now, be a good girl, Morgan said, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. And go back to the shadows where you belong. She was humiliated, crushed, utterly alone in a sea of faces. She turned, ready to flee, to escape this nightmare, when a sudden, profound silence crashed over the courtyard. The massive oak doors at the far end swung open with a groan that echoed in the new stillness. And he entered, Alpha King Kalen. He was not just a man, he was a force. His shoulders were broad enough to carry the weight of the entire kingdom. His dark hair fell around a face carved from stone and storm, and his eyes were the color of molten gold, scanning the crowd with an intensity that felt like a physical touch. The crowd parted for him like water before a ship's prow. He moved with a predator's grace, every step resonating with absolute authority. He was the center of this world, and everything else orbited around him. Lyra stood frozen, a statue of fear and awe. She was nothing, a speck of dust in his glorious presence. She prayed he would not look her way. But fate, it seemed, was not done with her. His golden gaze swept across the nobles, past her stepmother, and then, it stopped. It landed directly on her. The world narrowed to that single, terrifying point of connection. His eyes locked with hers, and in their depths, she saw not disdain, not anger, but a deep, unsettling recognition. He knew. He had to know. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a wild bird trying to escape its cage. He began to walk, not towards the throne, but towards her. The crowd held its breath, 1,000 eyes watching the king approach the invisible girl. He stopped mere feet from her, his immense presence blocking out everything else. The air crackled, humming with a tension she could feel in her teeth. His voice, when he spoke, was a low rumble that vibrated deep in her soul. You. The single word hung in the air, a question and a statement all at once. Lyra's breath caught. She was drowning in that golden stare. Why do you stand in the shadows? She tried to speak, but her voice was a dry leaf. I was. She couldn't say it. She couldn't admit to this king that she had been pushed aside. Kalen's head tilted slightly, his gaze never wavering. You were not like the others. A wave of pure panic washed over her. This was it. He was going to expose her. Here, in front of everyone. Your scent, he murmured. Read, more to himself than to her. It is familiar. He took a final step, closing the distance between them. He was so close she could see the flecks of lighter gold in his eyes, feel the heat radiating from him. The entire kingdom was watching, waiting for his judgment. He did not condemn her. He did not scorn her. Slowly, deliberately, he extended his hand to her. It was a strong, scarred hand, a warrior's hand, held palm up in a gesture of invitation. The silence was absolute. Lyra looked from his hand to his eyes, and in their stormy depths, she saw not a threat, but a question. A promise of something she couldn't understand. Her own hand trembled as she lifted it. Every instinct screamed at her to run. But something deeper, something ancient and brave that she never knew she possessed, made her reach out. Her small, pale fingers slid into his. His grip was warm, solid, unshakable, and in that single, electric touch, Lyra's world, her entire life of shadows and hiding, shattered forever. He did not let go. Part 2. The pull of fate. The silence in the courtyard was not just an absence of sound. It was a heavy, living thing, pressing down on everyone. All Lyra could hear was the frantic beating of her own heart, a wild drum against the stillness. The Alpha King's hand enveloped hers, not with crushing force, but with a certainty that felt more binding than any chain. He did not speak to the stunned nobles. He did not acknowledge Lady Morgan's horrified gasp. His entire focus was on Lyra, his golden eyes seeing straight through the fragile walls she had built around herself her entire life. "Come," he said, his voice low, a command that brooked no argument yet felt strangely like a rescue. He turned, and she had no choice but to follow, her legs moving on numb, unsteady limbs. He did not lead her to the throne, or to the center of the festivities. Instead, he guided her away from the crowd, through a secluded archway into a quiet, moonlit garden adjacent to the main courtyard. The murmur of the festival faded behind them, replaced by the gentle rustle of leaves and the soft trickle of a fountain. He finally released her hand, and she instantly felt the loss of its warmth, its stability. She clasped her hands together, trying to stop their trembling. "Why did you do that?" The question burst from her, laced with fear and confusion. "You humiliated my stepmother. You singled me out." Everyone was watching. Kaelin stood before her, a statue of power etched in moonlight. "Was I wrong?" he asked, his gaze unwavering. "Were you not standing in the shadows, pushed aside?" Lyra looked down at the cobblestones. "That is my place. It is the way of things." "Your place," he repeated, the words slow and deliberate. "I decide what the way of things is in my kingdom. And I saw no reason for you to be treated as less." Tears pricked at her eyes, but she fiercely willed them away. She would not show weakness in front of him. "You don't understand. It's not just about being treated as less. It's about what I am." "Then tell me." His voice was quiet, but it filled the entire garden. "What are you, Lyra?" Her breath hitched. He knew her name. Of course he knew her name. He was the king, but hearing it on his lips felt like a secret being uncovered. She couldn't say it. The words, "I am a half-wolf," stuck in her throat, a confession that could mean banishment or worse. "You are not like the others," he said again, answering his own question. "Your scent, it is a puzzle. There is the wildness of the forest, the depth of the wolf, but there is something else woven through it. Something resilient, human." There it was. The truth, laid bare not as an accusation, but as an observation. She felt the blood drain from her face. This was the end, but his next words were not a condemnation. "It is a scent I have never encountered. It is intriguing." He took a step closer, not threatening, but curious, like a scholar studying a rare text. "You carry yourself with a silence that others mistake for weakness. But it is not weakness, is it? It is survival. I see the strength it takes to hold your head high when the world tells you to bow it." Lyra could only stare at him, utterly disarmed. No one had ever looked at her and seen strength. They saw a flaw, a mistake, a creature to be pitied or scorned. I don't want your pity, your majesty, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips. I do not offer it. I offer my curiosity, and my protection. Protection? The word felt foreign on her tongue. The world of the court is a nest of vipers, he said, his gaze turning hard. You have just made a powerful enemy in your stepmother. And by drawing my attention, you have made others. They will see you as a threat, or as a pawn. You are no longer safe in the shadows. The reality of his words sank in, colder than the night air. He was right. Lady Morgan would never forgive this public defiance. By lifting her up, he had placed a target on her back. What would you have me do? She asked, her voice small. Stay, he said simply. Stay at the palace. Her eyes widened in alarm. I can't. That's impossible. It is necessary, he countered, his tone leaving no room for argument. I cannot protect you if you return to the outskirts. Here, you will be under my watch. But the ceremony, your duties, the rebellion, she stammered, repeating the fragments of court gossip she had overheard. A shadow crossed his face at the mention of the rebellion. The rebellion is precisely why you must stay. The kingdom is divided. There are those who would use any weakness, any discord, to their advantage. The way you were treated tonight, that is a weakness. A crack in our unity. I will not allow it. He was not asking her. He was telling her. The Alpha King had made a decision. Suddenly, the quiet of the garden was shattered by the sound of hurried, heavy footsteps. A tall, stern-looking man with a warrior's build emerged from the archway. Lyra recognized him as Eric, the king's most trusted advisor. His expression was grim. My king, Eric said, bowing his head slightly. Forgive the interruption. Urgent news from the eastern border. Callan's posture shifted instantly from the contemplative man to the formidable ruler. Report. The rogue wolves, they have attacked a border garrison. Not just an ambush, my king. A massacre. They are growing bolder. Their leader boasts of a purifier who will cleanse the land. Callan's jaw tightened, a muscle feathering along its line. The air around him seemed to grow colder, charged with a suppressed fury. How soon can the pack be ready to move? By first light, Eric replied. Then we move at first light. Callan's voice was like steel. Ready my armor. Eric nodded, cast a quick, unreadable glance at Lyra, and departed as swiftly as he came. The silence that returned was different now, filled with the weight of impending war. Callan turned back to Lyra, the storm in his eyes now directed outward. You see, he said quietly. The shadows are not safe for anyone anymore. He reached out, and for a breathtaking moment, she thought he would take her hand again. Instead, he gently touched a single finger to the simple silver pendant she wore around her neck, the only thing she had from her mother. Stay within the palace walls. Trust no one but Eric. He will ensure your safety. He was leaving, going to war, and he was leaving her here, in the heart of the viper's nest. She began, but the words failed her. He understood her unspoken fear. I do not believe in fate, Lyra. I believe in strength, in strategy, in the will to protect what is mine. His golden eyes held hers, and in their depths, she saw a promise that made her heart ache. But what I feel when I look at you, that is a problem for another day. When I return, we will figure this out. Together. Together. The word echoed in her soul long after he had turned and disappeared into the darkness, his cloak flowing behind him like a wing of night. She was alone again, but everything was different. She was no longer the invisible girl from the forest. She was the girl the Alpha King had publicly claimed. The girl he had promised to protect. The girl he had asked to wait for him. As he stood there in the moonlit garden, the weight of his gaze, his touch, his words, settled upon her. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach. But beneath it, something new was stirring, a fragile, terrifying, and beautiful spark of hope. The path ahead was shrouded in mist and danger. But for the first time in her life, she would not be walking it alone. Part 3. The Court of Whispers. The first light of dawn was a pale, reluctant smear against the sky when Lyra heard the departure. From the narrow window of the small chamber Eric had assigned her, a room far grander than her entire cottage, yet feeling more like a gilded cage, she watched the warriors assemble. They were a sea of disciplined power and silent fury, a stark contrast to the glittering festivities of the night before. And at their head, a figure of obsidian and steel, was Kalen. He did not look back at the palace. His gaze was fixed on the eastern horizon, on the war that called him away. With a signal too subtle for her to see, the column moved, a river of wolves flowing out of the palace gates and into the mist-shrouded forests, their silence more terrifying than any battle cry. And just like that, he was gone. The heavy silence that settled over the palace in the wake of their departure was profound. It was a void, and into that void, the whispers began to seep. Lyra did not leave her room that first day. A servant, a young girl with downcast eyes, brought her food, placing the tray on a table and scurrying away without a word. The message was clear. She was an anomaly, a creature to be serviced but not acknowledged. She was the king's strange pet, left behind in his kennel. On the second day, hunger for more than just food drove her to venture out. The moment she stepped into the corridor, the air changed. Courtiers, who had been chatting in hushed tones, fell silent as she passed, their eyes following her with a mixture of sharp curiosity and open disdain. Their whispers were like the rustling of poisonous leaves. The half-breed the king picked up. "Lady Morgan is furious. I heard she shattered a full vase of Lunara blossoms. What power could she possibly hold over him? A low enchantment, surely. He'll see his folly when he returns. The council will not stand for it." Each word was a tiny, sharp needle pricking at her resolve. She felt their judgment like a physical weight, making her shoulders slump. She found her way to the main hall, a vast space with vaulted ceilings and banners depicting the history of Viora's Alpha lines. She stood before a massive tapestry showing the first Alpha, a giant of a wolf standing triumphantly over a conquered beast. She felt impossibly small. Finding inspiration in our history? Or merely looking for a shadow to hide in? The voice, smooth as oil and cold as ice, came from behind her. Lyra turned slowly, her heart sinking. Lady Morgan stood there, flanked by her daughters. Her smile was a perfect, polished weapon. "Stepmother," Lyra said, forcing her voice not to tremble. "Please," Morgan said with a dismissive wave of her hand. "Let us not pretend here, in the heart of our true power. You may have dazzled the king with whatever rustic charm you possess, but this court sees you for what you are. An oversight. A temporary distraction." One of her daughters, Seraphine, sneered. "He only noticed you because you smell different. Like a human." It probably confused him. The blunt cruelty of it was like a slap. Lyra flinched, and Lady Morgan's smile widened, seeing the hit land. "You see?" Morgan purred. "You don't have the hide for this world. You are a rabbit who has wandered into a den of wolves. My advice? Run back to your forest while you still can. The king's protection is a fleeting thing. His interest will wane, and when it does..." She let the sentence hang in the air, a promise of ruin. "You will be all alone. And we will be waiting." They swept past her, their silks whispering against the stone floor, leaving her standing alone in the vast, echoing hall, their words echoing in her mind. A rabbit in a den of wolves. It felt true. For days, she drifted through the palace like a ghost. She spent hours in the vast library, its silence a small mercy. She traced the spines of books she could not read, the knowledge of the wolf kind forever out of her reach. She walked in the royal gardens, but even the beauty of the manicured hedges and exotic flowers felt like a mockery, a display of order and purity that she would never be part of. Her only respite came from an unexpected source. On the fifth day, as she sat by the same fountain where Kaelin had spoken to her, a gentle voice interrupted her solitude. "He sees something in you, you know." Lyra looked up, startled. It was Alara, the human girl she had seen in the village. Up close, she had kind eyes and a calm demeanor. "Who does?" Lyra asked, wary. "The king," Alara said, sitting beside her. "Kaelin is not a man given to whims. He is the most deliberate, calculating person I have ever known. For him to single you out, to defy tradition so publicly, he must have a reason. A good one. You're human," Lyra stated, the observation laced with a spark of kinship. "I am," Alara nodded. "And my presence here is tolerated because of my friendship with Isla, who comes from a very old, very powerful pure-blood family. But I am always an outsider. I understand the weight of the stairs, the silence that falls when you enter a room." Lyra felt a surge of gratitude so strong it threatened to bring tears to her eyes. For the first time since Kaelin left, she did not feel entirely alone. "Does it ever get easier?" Lyra whispered. Alara's smile was sad. "No, but you get stronger. You learn to build walls not of fear, but of quiet dignity. You learn which whispers to listen to, and which to let fade away." Their conversation was a lifeline. Alara became her guide, explaining the complex web of court politics, pointing out the powerful players on the council, and identifying those who were loyal to Kaelin versus those who sympathized with Lady Morgan's traditionalist views. It was from Alara that Lyra learned the full extent of the prophecy. They were in a secluded corner of the library, the dusty air smelling of old parchment and secrets. "The elders speak of it rarely," Alara said, her voice hushed. "The prophecy of the Alpha King's mate. It says the future queen will either be the kingdom's salvation or its destruction. She will unite the packs in a way never seen before, or she will shatter them into 1,000 warring factions." Lyra's blood ran cold. "And they think, because I'm a half-blood." Alara nodded grimly. "They believe you are the latter. The Shatterer. They think your mixed blood represents division, that it will dilute the royal line and weaken Viora forever. This is the true source of their fear. Lady Morgan doesn't just hate you for defying her, she genuinely believes you are a walking curse upon this kingdom." The weight of it was crushing. It wasn't just about personal dislike. It was about destiny. Her very existence was seen as a threat to the entire realm. How could she possibly fight against that? The answer came in the dead of night. She was jolted awake by a sound. Not a loud crash, but a subtle, wrong sound, the softest scrape of a boot against the stone floor outside her chamber door. Her half-wolf senses, always heightened, prickled with alarm. She held her breath, listening. The door to her room began to inch open, moving with a slowness that was far more menacing than a violent entry. Panic, cold and sharp, seized her. This was it. Lady Morgan had decided not to wait for the king's interest to wane. She was making her move now. Lyra slid silently from the bed, her heart hammering against her ribs. She had no weapon, no way to call for help. She was the rabbit, just as her stepmother had said. The door opened wider, revealing a hulking silhouette against the dim torchlight of the corridor. She could smell him, a wolf, but his scent was muddled, tainted with something bitter, like dark magic. As he lunged into the room, a blade glinting in his hand, instinct took over. Not the human instinct to freeze, but the wolf instinct to survive. She didn't try to fight him head-on. She was smaller, faster. She'd drive. Opt to the floor, rolling under the sweep of his arm, and scrambled towards the door. He was quick, grabbing a handful of her nightdress, yanking her back. His free hand, the one holding the knife, came down. With a cry of pure terror and fury, she twisted, throwing her weight against him. It was a desperate, clumsy move, but it was enough to throw off his aim. The blade meant for her heart sliced deep into her arm instead. White-hot pain blinded her for a second. But the pain, instead of paralyzing her, ignited something. A raw, primal power she had spent her entire life suppressing. A low growl erupted from her throat, a sound she hardly recognized as her own. Shocked by the feral sound coming from the girl he'd been sent to kill silently, the assassin hesitated for a fraction of a second. It was all she needed. She kicked out, her foot connecting hard with his knee. He grunted in pain, his grip loosening. She tore herself free, stumbling out into the corridor, screaming as loud as her lungs would allow. "Guards! Help!" Her voice echoed, shrill and terrified, through the stone halls. Doors began to slam open. Shouts echoed. The assassin, seeing his chance for a quiet kill gone, melted back into the shadows and vanished. Lyra collapsed against the cold wall, clutching her bleeding arm, her whole body shaking uncontrollably. The rabbit had not been eaten. It had fought back. It had screamed. And it had survived. As guards and startled courtiers gathered around her, their faces a mix of shock and concern, one face stood out in the crowd. It was Eric. He pushed through the others, his expression grim as he took in the scene, the open door, the blood on her arm, the terror in her eyes. He knelt beside her, his voice low and urgent. "Who was it? Did you see his face?" Lyra shook her head, tears of pain and shock finally streaming down her face. "No, but he was a wolf. His scent, it was wrong. Tainted." Eric's jaw tightened. He looked from her to the dark, empty corridor where the assassin had disappeared. The message was chillingly clear. The war was not just on the eastern border. The war was here, inside the palace, and Lyra was now standing directly on the front line. She was no longer just the king's curious interest. She was a player in the game. And she had just learned her first, bloody lesson. In the Court of Whispers, silence could be death. Part 4. The unseen current. The cut on her arm was a brand, a searing, painful line of fire that seemed to etch the night's terror directly into her skin. The palace healer, a woman whose face was a roadmap of stern lines and whose name Lyra never learned, worked with a brusque, unsettling efficiency. Her hands, though skilled, were cold, and she asked no questions, her silence speaking volumes about the kind of incidents that were best forgotten within the palace walls. The sting of the cleansing solution, the sharp pull of the needle as it wove her flesh back together, the tight constriction of the final bandage. It was all a brutal, physical confirmation that the gilded cage she found herself in was lined with sharpened wires. When the healer left, the room felt emptier, the lingering scent of bitter herbs a ghost of the violence that had visited her. Eric remained, a statue of simmering anger carved from shadow and duty. He stood by the window, his gaze fixed on the courtyard below where the last vestiges of night were retreating before a pale, hesitant dawn. "The king placed you under my protection," he said, his voice a low, gravelly thing that seemed to vibrate through the stone floor. It wasn't an apology, it was a statement of fact, laden with a cold, self-directed fury that was far more intimidating than any shouted curse. "This failure is mine. It will not be repeated." Lyra sat on the edge of the lavish bed, the silken covers feeling alien and unwelcoming against her skin. She pulled a heavy woolen blanket around her shoulders, seeking a warmth she couldn't find inside herself. The physical pain was a manageable, throbbing anchor, but the tremor that had taken root deep in her bones was another matter entirely. "It was not your fault," she whispered, her own voice sounding thin and frayed. He was like a shadow. There was no sound until it was too late. He didn't smell like a normal wolf. His scent was wrong. Stale and bitter, like old poison. Eric turned from the window, his eyes, the color of granite after a rain, sweeping over her, assessing not just her injury but her spirit. "You fought him off. You screamed. That took a kind of strength that cannot be taught." He paused, his head tilting slightly. "Many in your position, raised in comfort and safety, would have frozen, becoming an easy victim. You did not. You chose to survive. I was terrified, she admitted, the raw honesty torn from her. There was no point in pretending bravery she did not feel. My entire body was screaming at me to run, to hide. Courage is not the absence of fear, he stated, his tone flat and absolute, leaving no room for argument. It is the judgment that something else is more important than the fear. You judged that your life was worth fighting for. That is the only judgment that matters in this world. It is the first, and most crucial, lesson of survival. He moved to the door, his hand resting on the heavy iron latch. This chamber is compromised. It is no longer safe. I am moving you to the king's wing. To the antechamber adjacent to his own private quarters. The king's wing. The words landed with the weight of a tombstone. Nay, to be placed there was not just a change of location, it was a declaration, a move on the political board that everyone in the palace would notice. It was the heart of Kalin's power, the most secure and most symbolic part of the entire fortress. It was also the place most scrutinized, most envied. To be taken there was to be pulled from the periphery and placed squarely, undeniably, at the center of the storm. She would be living in the shadow of the absent king, a constant, living reminder of his controversial decision. The target on her back, already painted by Lady Morgan, would now be gilded and hung for all to see. Eric, she began, a protest forming on her lips, a plea for a different, quieter solution. He cut her off, his gaze unwavering. It is not a request. It is the only way to ensure the king's command is fulfilled. No one, not even the most brazen of Lady Morgan's allies, would dare strike at the very threshold of his door. You will be safe there. Or as safe as anyone can be in this den of snakes. And so, within the hour, her few borrowed possessions were gathered, and she was led through a series of increasingly opulent and heavily guarded corridors. The air itself changed in the king's wing. It was older, quieter, smelling of polished stone, old leather, and a faint, lingering scent of pine and frost that was uniquely Kalin's. The guards here were different too. They didn't stare with open curiosity or thinly veiled contempt. Their eyes, sharp and discerning, simply registered her presence, acknowledged Eric's authority, and returned to their vigilant watch. They were Kalin's personal guard, their loyalty as hard and unyielding as the armor they wore. The antechamber was, in itself, a room grander than any she had ever imagined. A large, woven rug depicting the history of the Alpha Kings covered most of the floor, and a great fireplace, currently cold, dominated one wall. A heavy oak desk stood near a window that offered a breathtaking, and terrifying, view of the entire kingdom sprawling out towards the distant, misty mountains. This was not a guest room. This was a room for someone of importance, a place where a royal advisor might work, or where a favored guest of the highest honor might stay. The weight of the implication was suffocating. Left alone, the silence of the room pressed in on her. The fear from the attack began to curdle into something else, a simmering, restless anger. Anger at the assassin, at Lady Morgan, at a world that demanded she apologize for her own existence. The passive acceptance she had cloaked herself in for years was shredded, torn away by a knife's edge. The rabbit had been cornered, and it had bitten back. It would not go quietly into the shadows again. This newfound resolve, however, did not magically erase her reality. Over the next few days, her world became this opulent prison. Her only regular visitor was Alara, who brought her meals personally, a brave and defiant act of solidarity that Lyra clung to. "They're all talking, of course," Alara said one afternoon, her voice hushed as they sat by the large window. "Some are saying you staged the attack yourself to gain sympathy and move closer to the king's quarters. Others whisper that it was Lady Morgan, making a move to eliminate a rival before the king returns." "A rival?" Lyra choked on the word. "I am no rival. I am a problem she wants to solve." "You are a problem that the king has chosen to keep close," Alara corrected gently. "That makes you a rival in her eyes. But there is another faction, Lyra. a smaller, quieter one. They are curious. They see that the king, who is famously pragmatic and never acts without reason, has broken tradition for you. They wonder if he sees something the rest of us cannot. This was a new thought, a tiny, fragile seed of possibility. But it was quickly overshadowed by the sheer, crushing boredom and helplessness of her confinement. She was safe, but she was a statue, waiting for the king to return and decide her fate. The inaction was its own kind of torture. It was during this time that she began to explore the only resource available to her, the small, curated bookshelf in the antechamber. Most of the volumes were dense historical accounts of battles and bloodlines, written in a script she found difficult to decipher. But one book, bound in worn, supple leather with no title, fell open to a page that made her breath catch. It was not a history. It was a book on the flora of Viora, filled with beautifully detailed illustrations of plants and herbs. And she could read it. Her mother, in the quiet hours of her childhood, had taught her the human script, a final, loving gift of a world she was never supposed to be part of. Here, in the heart of the wolf kind's power, was a piece of her human heritage. It felt like a secret sign. She devoured the book, losing herself in the descriptions of healing herbs, poisonous berries, and plants with magical properties. She read about the Lunara blossom, which bloomed only under the full moon and was said to enhance a wolf's connection to its lunar powers. She read about shadow moss, which grew in deep caves and could be used to mask one's scent. This was knowledge. This was power of a different kind. It was a language the wolves, in their focus on strength and scent, often overlooked. A week after the attack, a formal summons came. Not from a would-be assassin, but from the royal council. Eric delivered the message, his expression unreadable. They wish to speak with you. To understand the events of the other night and your place here. It was a polite way of saying she was to be interrogated. This was the den of wolves she had been thrown into, and she would have to face them alone. The council chamber was a circular room dominated by a massive, round table of dark, polished wood. Seated around it were a dozen of the most powerful wolves in Viora, their collective aura a palpable force of judgment and authority. Lady Morgan was among them, her expression one of cool, detached interest, as if observing a mildly intriguing insect. At the head of the table sat an elder with a long, silver-streaked beard and eyes that held the weight of centuries. This, she knew from Alara's lessons, was Elder Theron, the head of the council. Lyra, Elder Theron began, his voice a dry rustle of leaves. You find yourself in a most unusual position. The Alpha King has shown you a singular favor, the reasons for which are not yet clear to this council. And now, an attempt has been made on your life within these very walls. Tell us, in your own words, what happened. All eyes were on her. She could feel their scrutiny, their doubt, their hostility. She felt the old urge to shrink, to lower her gaze, to mumble her answers. But the memory of the knife, the feel of her own blood, the cold determination in Eric's eyes, rose up within her. She would not be the rabbit. She took a slow, steadying breath, her bandaged arm aching in sympathy. I was awakened by a sound, she said, her voice clearer and stronger than she expected. She did not look at Lady Morgan, but kept her focus on Elder Theron. The lock on my door was being picked. When the man entered, he moved with a purpose. He was there to kill me. He was a wolf, but his scent was corrupted. It was masked by something artificial, something dark. When I fought back, he hesitated, as if surprised I would resist. He cut my arm before I could scream and alert the guards, who then chased him off. A tall, severe-looking councilman with a scar across his brow leaned forward. And why would anyone wish to kill you? A simple girl from the outskirts? What threat do you pose? This was the heart of it. The question hanging over the entire room. Lyra met his gaze. I pose no threat by myself. But it seems my presence here, by the king's command, is seen as a threat to some. I cannot speak to their motives. I can only speak to the fact that I was attacked for the crime of residing where the king placed me." Lady Morgan finally spoke, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "It is a terrible thing, to be sure. But we must consider all possibilities. Is it not convenient that this attack resulted in you being moved to the most secure location in the palace, directly adjacent to our king's private chambers? It has why cemented your status here, has it not?" The insinuation was a masterstroke, painting her as a cunning manipulator. Lyra felt a hot flush of anger. She saw the subtle nods from a few other council members. "My status, as you call it, was given to me by the Alpha King," Lyra replied, her tone cooling. "I did not ask for it. I did not stage a knife to my throat to earn it. I would have been perfectly content to remain in the shadows, unseen and unbothered. The king's decision brought me into the light. And it seems the light here is very, very dangerous." A ripple of surprise went through the room. They had expected a frightened girl, not someone who could parry their verbal thrusts. Elder Theron studied her with a new, keen interest. "You speak of a corrupted scent," he said, steering the conversation back. "Can you describe it further?" Lyra closed her eyes, calling back the memory, pushing past the fear to the sensory details. It was like wet ash and rotting belladonna. It clung to the air, a foulness that tried to smother his natural wolf scent. It was magic, but not like the magic of the moon. It was something older and darker. The council fell into a heavy silence. The description meant something to them, something that clearly disturbed the elder wolves. Lady Morgan's mask of cool indifference slipped for a fraction of a second, revealing a flicker of something else, alarm. Elder Theron nodded slowly. "Thank you, child. You have been most informative." The dismissal was clear. As she was led from the room by Eric, she felt their eyes on her back, but the nature of their gaze had shifted. The curiosity Alara had spoken of was now mixed with a healthy dose of wariness. She was no longer just the king's perplexing interest, she was a witness to a darkness they recognized. Back in the antechamber, the silence felt different. It was no longer oppressive but contemplative. She had faced the wolves and had not been eaten. She had stood her ground. And in doing so, she had learned a crucial piece of information. The magic used against her was known to the elders, and it frightened them. That night, she didn't cower in her bed. She sat at the large desk, the book on flora open before her. She wasn't just reading about plants anymore. She was studying. She was looking for an advantage, for a way to understand the world she was trapped in. The attack had not broken her, it had forged her. The half-wolf orphan was beginning to learn how to navigate the currents of power, and her first lesson was that knowledge, even the quiet, overlooked kind, could be the sharpest weapon of all. The king had seen a strength in her she didn't know she possessed. Now, it was time to prove him right. The days following the council interrogation were a intense anticipation. The palace, which had once felt like a gilded cage, now felt like a bowstring pulled taut, waiting for the arrow to be loosed. Lyra's world had shrunk to the opulent confines of the king's wing, but her mind had never been more expansive, more alive with a sharp, calculating energy. The fear was still there, a cold, familiar companion, but it was now overshadowed by a simmering, focused resolve. The rabbit was gone. In its place was something new, something that was learning to use its teeth. Alara remained her lifeline, her quiet presence a balm against the silent hostility of the court. She brought more than just meals, she brought information, gleaned from her unique position as a tolerated outsider. "The council is divided," she confided one evening, her voice a hushed whisper in the grand antechamber. "Elder Theron and a few others are deeply troubled by your description of the magic. They speak of old texts, of forbidden arts that haven't been seen since the last great schism. Lady Morgan's faction is pushing for your removal, calling your presence a destabilizing influence, but Theron is resisting. He insists on waiting for the king's return." "And the rebellion?" Lyra asked, her gaze drifting to the eastern window, where Kaelin had vanished into the mist. Rumors are all we have, Alara admitted. Some say the king's forces have them cornered in the Blackwood. Others whisper of a great battle, of terrible losses on both sides. The silence from the front is frightening. It was this silence that preyed on Lyra most of all. The not knowing was a special kind of torture. Was he safe? Was he wounded? The thought of Kaelin, the immovable pillar of strength, being struck down was a chilling possibility she could not fully entertain. Her connection to him, that inexplicable pull she had felt from the first moment in the courtyard, had only grown in his absence. It was a thread of silver tension stretched across the miles, and she felt every tremor along its length. Driven by this restless energy, she plunged deeper into the Book of Flora, her fingers tracing the illustrations not as a passive reader, but as a student seeking answers. She began to see the patterns, the connections. The Lunara blossom, which enhanced lunar power, often grew near Silver Root, a plant that could, in high concentrations, temporarily suppress a wolf's shift. It was a balance, a natural check and balance. She read of a rare, crimson flower called the blood rose, whose thorns carried a neurotoxin that induced paralysis, a symptom that chillingly mirrored the condition of the wolves in the attacked garrison Eric had described. This was no longer just academic curiosity, it was a map of the very weapons being used in the shadows against the key. Engidam. Her isolation was broken a week later by the arrival of a small, unexpected package. It was delivered not by a servant, but by a young, serious-faced page who offered a stiff bow before scurrying away. The package was wrapped in plain brown paper and tied with a simple string. There was no note. With a cautious heart, she untied it. Inside, nestled on a bed of soft wool, was a single, flawless feather. It was not black, like the omen from the other story, but a deep, iridescent blue, like a piece of the twilight sky. As she picked it up, a faint, clean scent of ozone and alpine air filled her senses. It was a scent she recognized, a scent that clung to the very stones of the king's wing. It was Kaelin's. It wasn't a message. It was a reminder, a promise. He was thinking of her. He was alive. A sob caught in her throat, and she clutched the feather to her chest, the first real, untainted joy she had felt since his departure flooding through her. It was a spark in the darkness, and it ignited a final, crucial change within her. She was not just fighting for her own survival anymore. She was holding a place for him to return to. She was part of his survival. This newfound strength was tested sooner than she could have imagined. The very next day, the tense peace of the palace shattered. It began with a distant, unified howl from the walls, a sound of alarm, not war. This was followed by the frantic ringing of the great bell in the watchtower. Eric burst into her chamber, his armor on, his face a grim mask. "They're here," he said, his voice tight. "Kaelin?" she asked, her heart leaping with a painful hope. "No. The rebels. They're not in the Blackwood. They're at our gates. Hundreds of them." A cold dread, different from any she had felt before, washed over her. This was not a single assassin in the night. This was an army. She followed Eric to a secluded balcony that overlooked the main gates. The sight below stole the air from her lungs. A sea of wolves, their fur matted and their eyes burning with a fanatical fervor, stood just beyond arrow range. They were not the disciplined force of the royal army. They were a ragged, desperate horde, but their numbers were staggering. And at their head stood a massive, gray-furred wolf she had never seen before. This, she presumed, was the rebel leader. But it was what she felt that truly terrified her. A pressure, a psychic wave of despair and rage, rolled off the rebel army and crashed against the palace walls. It was the same foul energy, the same, corrupted, scent she had smelled on her attacker, but magnified 1,000-fold. It was a weapon aimed at the spirit, designed to break the will of the defenders before a single arrow was fired. She could see its effect immediately. The guards on the wall. faltered, their postures slumping, their grips on their weapons loosening. Whispers of doubt and fear began to ripple through the ranks behind her. "They're using the same magic," she whispered to Eric, her voice trembling not with fear for herself, but for everyone on the walls. "The dark magic. It's breaking their will to fight." Eric's jaw was clenched so tight she thought it might crack. "I know, but we cannot sally out. We are outnumbered. Our only hope is to hold the walls, and without the will to do so." He didn't need to finish the sentence. Lyra watched in horror as the scene unfolded. The rebel leader began to pace, his voice amplified by the same dark power, echoing over the field. "People of Viora, look at your so-called leaders. They hide behind stone while a half-breed abomination warms the king's bed. She is the symbol of your decay, the prophecy of ruin made flesh. Surrender her to us, and this ends. The kingdom will be purified." His words were a poison, and the dark magic carried them into the hearts and minds of the defenders. Lyra saw a guard throw down his spear. Then another. Panic was beginning to spread. Lady Morgan's faction would be seizing this moment, arguing for the unthinkable, to hand her over. This was it. This was the precipice. The kingdom was about to fall, not to claws and teeth, but to fear and lies. And she was the focal point, the shatterer of the prophecy. But as she stood there, watching the collapse of everything Kaelin had built, something within her snapped into a perfect, crystalline clarity. The prophecy was not a sentence. It was a choice. She could be the shatterer, or she could be the salvation. It was her decision, not the council's, not the rebels, hers. She looked at Eric, her eyes no longer those of a frightened girl, but of a queen in waiting. "Open the gates." Eric stared at her as if she had lost her mind. "What?" "Lyra, that is suicide. They will tear you apart. They are tearing us apart from out there right now." She shot back, her voice sharp, commanding. "Their weapon is fear. Ours must be truth. I will not let this kingdom fall because of me. Open the gates." The authority in her voice was absolute, an echo of Kaelin's own unyielding will. Eric, a warrior who had followed orders his entire life, saw something in her face that he could not disobey. It was not a request. It was the only path forward. He gave a sharp, reluctant nod and barked orders into a communication rune. As the massive, iron-reinforced gates began to groan open, a shocked silence fell over both the rebel army and the defenders on the walls. Every eye was fixed on the widening gap. Lyra took a deep, steadying breath, clutching the blue feather hidden in her palm. She felt the dark magic press against her, a suffocating blanket of despair, but she also felt the two halves of her soul, the human heart that knew love and hope, and the wolf spirit that knew ferocity and protection, merge into a single, unbreakable whole. Her mixed blood was not a weakness, it was her armor against this specific darkness. She walked out, alone. She was a single, small figure in a simple tunic, facing down a howling army of hundreds. The wind whipped her hair, and she stood straight, her shoulders back, her gaze fixed on the rebel leader. The gray wolf shifted into his human form, a hulking, scarred man with wild eyes. "So, the abomination delivers herself. A wise, if cowardly, choice." His voice boomed, laced with the dark power. But Lyra did not flinch. "I am not an abomination," she said, her voice calm, yet it carried, amplified not by magic, but by a profound, unwavering certainty. It cut through the psychic noise like a knife. "I am Lyra, daughter of a wolf mother and a human father. And I stand before you not as a symbol of ruin, but as proof of a lie." The rebel leader laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "A lie? You are the living proof of the prophecy. You will be our ruin. The only ruin here is the one you are creating with your own hands." She fired back, her voice rising, ringing with passion. "You speak of a purifier. You follow a leader who uses the very darkness the ancient texts warn against. The same darkness that was used in an attempt to murder me in my bed. Do you not see? You are not the cure for this kingdom's ills, you are the symptom. You are being manipulated. She took a step forward, her eyes sweeping across the faces of the rebel army, seeing not monsters, but desperate, misguided wolves. You fight because you feel overlooked? Because you feel the kingdom has left you behind? I understand that feeling more than anyone in this world. I have lived my entire life in the shadows, pushed aside, told I did not belong. But the Alpha King did not see an abomination. He saw a person. He offered me protection, not because of my blood, but in spite of it. He is fighting for a kingdom where strength is not measured by purity, but by loyalty. By heart. And what are you doing? You are trying to destroy the one leader who might actually build a future for you. Her words were having an effect. The fanatical gleam in some of the rebels' eyes was faltering, replaced by confusion, by doubt. The dark magic's hold was weakening. The rebel leader snarled, sensing his control slipping. Do not listen to her honeyed words. She bewitched the king. She will bewitch you. It is not me who wields bewitchment. Lyra shouted, pointing a finger directly at him. It is you, or rather, it is the one who pulls your strings. Where is your purifier? Is he here, fighting alongside you? Or is he safe in the shadows, letting you die for his cause? A murmur ran through the rebel ranks. It was the question none of them had dared to ask. It was then that a new voice cut through the tension, a voice that vibrated with raw, untamed power and sent a shockwave of recognition through every soul present. The purifier is here. Every head turned. From the tree line at the edge of the field, a new force emerged. And at its head, his armor scarred and bloodied but his presence more commanding than ever, was Kalen. His golden eyes burned with a ferocious light, and beside him, bound in chains of solidified moonlight, was a figure that made the entire court gasp in unison. It was Lord Valerius. The traitorous general, Kalen's most trusted advisor, struggled against his bonds, his face a contorted mask of fury and defeat. The half-breed is a blight, he screamed, his voice stripped of its former authority, revealed as the shrill, desperate cry of a fanatic. I sought to save us. To purify the royal line. I am the purifier. The revelation was a thunderclap. The rebel army stared, their fervor dissolving into stunned disbelief. They had been led, used, and betrayed by a high-ranking member of the very court they sought to overthrow. Kalen's gaze found Lyra across the field. In his eyes, she saw a maelstrom of emotions, the exhaustion of battle, the fury of betrayal, and a blazing, undeniable pride as he took in the scene. Her, standing alone and unbroken before an army, her words having done what an army could not, broken the enemy's spirit. He turned his attention to the rebels, his voice a roll of thunder that demanded submission. Your leader is a traitor and a coward who used dark magic to manipulate you into tearing our kingdom apart. The war is over. Lay down your arms, and you will be granted pardon. Continue to fight, and you will share his fate. The choice was clear. The sound of weapons clattering to the ground was like a sudden, cleansing rain. The rebellion was over. The aftermath was a blur of controlled chaos. The rebels were disarmed and escorted away under guard. Valerius was dragged to the dungeons, his screams of rage fading into the depths of the palace. But for Lyra, the world had narrowed to a single point. Kalen walked towards her, his stride eating up the distance between them. He stopped before her, his immense presence a shelter she had ached for. He looked down at her, his gaze sweeping over her face, taking in her courage, her resolve, the woman she had become in his absence. You opened the gates, he said, his voice a low, awe-filled rumble. You came back, she replied, her own voice thick with emotion. He reached out, his hand, still flecked with the dirt and dried blood of battle, cup. Her cheek. The touch was electric, a jolt of pure, life-giving energy. It was a confirmation, a homecoming. I told you, he said, his thumb gently stroking her skin. We would figure this out together. The following days were a whirlwind of healing and reconciliation. Kaelin, with Lyra at his side, worked tirelessly to mend the fractures in the kingdom. The pardoned rebels were given land and a chance to rebuild, their loyalty won not through fear but through forgiveness. The dark magic Valerius had used was purged from the land by the combined efforts of the elders and the cleansing light of the full moon. And then, the day arrived. The day of the mating ceremony. The entire kingdom, pure blood, half-blood, and human, gathered in the main courtyard, the very place where Lyra's journey had begun. The air was not tense, but thrumming with a joyous, hopeful energy. The moon, full and brilliant, shone down like a benevolent silver eye. Lyra stood at the end of a path of white petals, no longer in a borrowed gown, but in a creation of stunning symbolism. Her tunic was the white of the moon, embroidered with silver threads that formed swirling patterns of unity, wolves and humans standing together. Over it, she wore a cloak of deep forest green, representing her origins and her strength. She was a fusion of all that she was, and she wore it not as a compromise, but as a crown. Kaelin waited for her at the dais, dressed in his formal ceremonial armor, but his head was bare, his gaze soft and fixed only on her. As she walked towards him, the crowd was silent, not with judgment, but with reverence. She reached him, and he took both her hands in his. Elder Theron stood before them, his voice strong and clear. People of Viora, we stand here tonight not just to witness a union, but to witness the dawn of a new era. We have faced the darkness of division and despair, and we have triumphed. The prophecy spoke of a queen who would either save us or shatter us. We have found our queen. She did not shatter us with her differences, she saved us with her courage, her heart, and her unwavering spirit. She is our harmony bringer. A cheer erupted, a wave of sound so powerful it seemed to shake the very stars. Kaelin's voice joined the elders, his words meant for her, but heard by all. Lyra, when I first saw you, I saw a mystery. A light in the shadows I could not ignore. I have seen that light defy an army. I have seen it heal a broken kingdom. You are my strength. You are my heart. You are my equal in every way. My mate. He leaned in, and with the entire kingdom as their witness, he pressed his lips to her forehead in a kiss of profound, soul-deep devotion. A soft, warm, silver light bloomed where his lips touched, a visible seal of their bond that spray. Add a gentle warmth through her entire being. Then, it was her turn. She stood on her toes, and with a love that felt as ancient as the moon itself, she pressed her own kiss to his cheek. A corresponding light, warm and golden, flared on his skin, intertwining with her silver radiance. The moment the two lights met, they erupted. A wave of pure, harmonious energy, silver and gold intertwined, exploded from them and washed over the entire kingdom. It was a wave of peace, of unity, of absolute, unshakable belonging. It was the final, definitive end of the old divisions. As the light faded, Kaelin turned, raising their joined hands to the sky. Behold your queen. The silence that followed was absolute for one single, breathless second. And then, it began. A single, powerful, joyous howl from an old wolf in the crowd. Then another, and another. From the highest noble to the lowest pardoned rebel, from the purest blood to the human friends like Alara, thousands of voices lifted as one in a triumphant, unified song to the moon. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated acceptance and hope, a sound that would be remembered in legends for 1,000 years. Lyra looked out at her people, her vision blurred with happy tears. She leaned into Kaelin's side, his arm wrapping firmly around her, solid and eternal. I'm home, she whispered, her voice lost in the glorious noise, but he heard it. He pressed a kiss to her hair, his voice a soft rumble against her ear. We both are. The camera of history pulled back, capturing the United Kingdom howling at the moon, with their king and queen standing together at the center of it all, their bonded lights still faintly glowing. The girl from the outskirts, the half-wolf orphan, had not just found her place. She had created a new one for everyone, a kingdom not of pure blood, but of pure heart. And as the moon traced its path across the sky, it was clear, the story of the half-wolf queen was not an ending. It was the most beautiful beginning.